Al-Khwarizmi, you would read in an American textbook, Al-Khwarizmi is an Arab intellectual, and my background didn't let me accept that. Okay, I'm not and I learned to started to dig into that. There's more to this, man. And okay, sure, the name is Arabic, but that's not how you define something. I mean, Bukhara is it's an enigma in the sense it's been most mentioned and most well studied, yet most least understood. Well, the changes that happened in Uzbekistan in 2017, after which Central Asia became connected to itself. And I would argue that this is the first time in history we can say we have Central Asia. So tradition, by the definition, is modern. So what is alive is modern because it could survive. It found a way to find its way. Well, that more languages, more ideas, more, as you said, ways of solving the same problem in different places. And if we lose that, we lose a lot. For instance, Britain is a whole generation of scholars who studied Kyrgyzstan deeply because that's where they could go, and one led to another. One has a network who helps another one, and so on, more so than others. Americans had a very different relationship with Uzbekistan, and they developed more Uzbek-related scholarship in the U.S. The Central Asia was not connected with each other, so we have had a generation of people, not like yours, but anybody even 10 years younger than you, who grew up not knowing anybody else in Central Asia. Is that when we look at Central Asian countries, we cannot think of them same as any other developing countries because they were at high level of development not very long ago in terms of standard things of healthcare, social education, and so on. And while even China, for whether it's India or China, but Korea for that matter, and many African countries, there the model is of growing something from the ground, developing where something didn't exist. The researchers should be given time to do research. There has to be those two things have to come with equal power. So if you're in Cambridge, you have 50% time off for research and 50% of teaching the thing. But right now what we're seeing is an opposite, that there is no research provision, but teachers are forced to produce or at least show research results without any time or money put into this. And so you kill both research and teaching as a result. And that's where the biggest mistake being made right now. Number one problem in Central Asia, the number one, I would say, in any aspect, is there is still a belief somewhere in the mindset about being a defeated Soviet Union, and those who defeated know it better. And we must then borrow it from outside, and that's the answer. Number one thing that has to be done is that any rector, any minister which proposes to sign an MOU with the university should be immediately fired.
I have today very, very special guest, a friend of mine, a person whom I know for, I guess, 25 years or so, Montu or Siddharth Saxena, Professor Saxena from University of Cambridge. He is a well-known physicist, but not only physicist, but also very well-known specialist and expert on Central Asia. He established Cambridge Central Asia Forum. He does a lot of things related to Central Asia. So we will discuss all the things in a few seconds. So first of all, thank you so much, Montu, for your time, for your participation. I know you just came from Tashkent, perhaps yesterday or today. Welcome back.
Thank you, Alisher. It's wonderful introduction. It brings back many memories 25 years ago, and I'm delighted that we have this chance to share our, visions of the future, but also our the relationship of all these years where we have learned so much from you. You have been an important factor in many things I have done in Central Asia. Yes.
Thank you. Well, Professor Siddharth Saxena, but his friends call him Montu. So if you don't mind, I just call you by name Montu. He is a good friend of mine. As I said, Montu, Professor Saxena, is a well-known physicist. He works in very famous Cavendish laboratory in Cambridge University. It's a very interesting, by education and by your scientific degree. You have a PhD in physics. You should be a scientist in physics. But how did it happen that you became interested in Central Asia and got involved in Central Asia affairs? It's very interesting to know. Please describe how this happened.
Thank you, Alisher. I would say I would start by saying having a nickname like Montu always invokes an interesting thing in Central Asia. I have to always remind people that it's not Manti, but it's Montu. And it's common across Central Asia because
Big
with
difference.
yeah, big difference. I like to be, meaty and delicious, but but as per your question, yeah, it's a complex answer. Uh, you know, um, it's a question similar to asking why some people choose to work on, particle physics versus magnetism, or development Africa versus microeconomics of World Bank. So it's a complex set of interactions and interconnections that lead you to there. And later in life, like now, you have to consider like how you got here. Why are we here? and and I would say a very personal thing that invoked this foundations of understanding learning about Central Asia. I come from a city in India called Lucknow. It is in north central India, a city which has been connected historically to the culture of the Persianate and Central Asian world for a very, very long time. There's a cultural connection between my city and the Central Asia region and Persianate world and Central Asian world. And as an example, I grew up with a word like dampukht, food, and only to later realize that this is the same specialty, same kind of style of cooking in Bukhara and parts of Uzbekistan. So it's at a very, very simple level. This connections was there. So and there were many other things in our words we used and last names of people, and so all of them you started. If you have I would claim I have a curious mind, and I started to investigate, and I always used to lead to this place called Central Asia. Often, well, let's be more direct. Mostly those famous cities of what now Uzbekistan, and um, but that didn't make any sense because they were part of Soviet Union, the great friend of India, the great global power with modern, MiGs and military interaction India had with the thing. It was modernity. It was not the past. It just didn't make none of it came together. So in trying to unravel that connection, so my modern side remained exploring science, but the other connection with it was these questions. They led me to
Very interesting.
build more and more interest in the region. Yes, that's
So, in a way, you embody this our historical connections.
I very much hope so. This is certainly, yeah.
Okay, that's a historical background.
Yeah.
In reality, in your personal life, how it happens? What
Sure.
was the first point to
Yeah,
departure?
yes. So I would say I would just to linguistic semantics, I would say I'll explain the first part of convergence rather than departure.
All
First,
right.
while I was fortunate to have studied and traveled in a number of countries, including the Soviet Union and the United States, and where I ended up spending my early formative years in the United States, and one of the beauties of American system is that you can double major, triple major, you can take any kind of classes, you could do mix and match, and that opportunity I think I benefited hugely from, and I started to take further classes in my interest, unraveling the same questions I raised about the Persian world, the Arabic world, the Central Asian world was then not very well part of it. So it was almost like pushing the boundaries of what you learn. You say Al-Khwarizmi, you would read in an American textbook, Al-Khwarizmi is an Arab intellectual, and my background didn't let me accept that. Okay, I'm not and I learned to started to dig into that. There's more to this man, and okay, sure, the name is Arabic, but that's not how you define something. And so I started to take more and more classes in anthropology, in sociology, and particularly in history of the general Islamic world, if you would say, and that kind of build up as you can say a second major. So this was happening together because the system allowed it to happen.
But I
And
guess you also got a degree in anthropology, or
yeah, so it's a second major. It was historical anthropology, if you might say. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Could you please tell us about Central Asia Forum
uh-huh.
at Cambridge University? What was the beginning?
Mm, mm.
Any
Yes.
difficulties when you had no any Central Asia connections of Cambridge University, but you started from scratch?
Right. So I would say that my endeavor is product of the time that it happened. So this my after US I came to do a PhD in Cambridge in physics and so on. But Cambridge, you have been there itself. It's a very multidisciplinary place. Many conversations. People don't ask you even what subject you are. You discuss what we discuss, and
Right.
and very often I was discussing my interest in Central Asia, about these places, but the few exact steps to record are very interesting. Of course, my group of friends who I did both physics and other things. I have formed in Cambridge something called an international society, which was where different cultures will meet and display their prominence to the British audience and so on. And we formed a subgroup within that, which was always talking about Central Asia. And most of us were from Trinity-College Cambridge, and we had an opportunity to apply for funds. This is going to the year 1997 to visit this part of the world, which is in a sense just become available. Yeah,
Right.
because so there was, of course, I think it would be wrong to say there was nothing about Central Asia in Cambridge. There was a strong Eurasia and Soviet studies program, and within that there were elements and those people who are well known, like Caroline Humphrey and others who had studied the region, but peripherally, not this Central Asia, but things around it. So we said we as students should visit since this opportunity, and we were very fortunate that 6 of us were funded by Trinity College to travel to then Uzbekistan, and our visit was more than we had expected. And the people who went were of mix. So there was my friend Professor Ananya Kabir. Well, then Ananya, now she's a professor of cultural historical studies in King's College London. And then two other physics and engineering friends and a social anthropologist friend. So we all ended up together exploring this, well, multiple things. So when we came back, we were charged with with something to do, and this is how Central Asia Forum was born. We started to look for speakers who would come and speak in our little student society. So this was the beginning of the idea. We didn't call us a Central Asia Forum, but that's what was Central Asia Seminars. We were a group, and that, in a sense, grew with us in two ways. As we grew in our own careers, the idea became more and more institutionalized and more formal, and we could both call on resources to do research, to have further research visits and so on, and invite people from the region. But the real institutional point happened. It was around very unfortunate events in the world. 9/11 had happened, and the world had realized, the British system had realized that they know nothing about the region. They somehow also conflated the. So we were really formed to explain that yes, this is similar to Afghanistan, but it is not Afghanistan. This is a different part of the world. Very close connection, very many things, but it's not the same. You won't call Iran and Iraq the same country. The same way you can't say Uzbekistan and Pakistan and Afghanistan are the same country. They are all three very different countries
Yeah,
with
stance.
stance. Yeah, we were against the idea of stance. Stance is the miss
Again.
pronunciation. Yeah. So So then we were again lucky with the help of some of our senior colleagues like Professor Karen Humphrey, Professor Postgate. They helped us to get funding to make and be a formal institution, and we received and then we were under a new name. We were called the Committee for Central and Inner Asia. So it also, you would find amusing. So if you look at the title, it's CCIA. That led to many jokes in itself. And we were lucky to then manage a consortia from our center across 16 UK institutions. We had people who are now your leading members of Central Asia Studies community across the UK. And we funded students, researchers, and anyone else who had interest in the region, but most likely didn't have connections to the region directly to do research. And this is how it became a learned body in that sense. And we did that to a point where the funding lasted, and then we became much more, we had laid the seed across the UK, but then we focused on developing it in Cambridge. And I think this is a point where I met you, and I think you played a very big role in being there and consolidating our, intellectual connection to Central Asia. Yeah, so
Thank you.
Yeah.
But now Forum is a well-established, institutionalized structure within Cambridge University, right?
Yeah. Yes. So I mean, Cambridge University is a very complex beast, as you know, with its colleges and its departments and so on.
Right.
So Cambridge colleges are just a word for in the audience who don't know much about it. The colleges are constituent members of the University of Cambridge, where students sort of live, eat, have debates and sports, but also have teaching at some level. But they're not divided by disciplines. They can have all disciplines, and departments, of course, are disciplinary. So within this realm, we found that it was, given our very wide disciplinary remit, that we are officially under a college, in this case, Jesus College, where I've been a fellow for many years, where you were a visiting fellow, to be the official body which represents the region, and then collates all of Cambridge University's interest. So it doesn't limit, anybody else can also try to do that, but we are the platform on which anybody can join. It doesn't matter you come from earthquake science or you want to do ancient manuscripts, but we are the platform where you can be part of a community. There are regular seminars. We have relationships with departments in the university where we teach both master's and PhD level research students. We also engage with undergraduates who are interested in the region, who want to do projects. So we provide supervision and an intellectual sort of space for the studies. But we are officially a body of the Jesus College, and we report to the Council of Jesus College. We have a governing committee and an advisory board from across the university.
Wonderful. I know about your very special relationship with Bukhara. And I think Bukhara played a big role in your relationship and in your love affairs with Central Asia. Could you please tell us a little bit about your first trip to Bukhara and how Bukhara changed over the time?
Yes, you're absolutely right. As I mentioned, that the seeds of this were already in my head from our cultural connection from where I was born. And then in 1997, this visit, which I had with my colleagues, and we arrived in Bukhara, and we all had the same, feeling that this is something special. And there's the old expression, which we had read in the guidebook. We didn't know much about that how, the lights of the heaven, enlighten the world. Well, but the heaven is enlightened by light of Bukhara. and this reality just confronted us the moment we arrived there, by Tashkent by
So
train.
you felt it.
Yeah, we felt it. It's a very spiritual moment, kind of a thing, and we all come from different cultural and linguistic and even religious backgrounds, but it was just one thing, and the that led me to further try to understand the place from my just basic few words and quotes from here and there, and it I think still remains one of the most understudied places, which is a model for for what in English we call cosmopolitanism, not in Russian, but in the English meaning of cosmopolitanism.
Right.
Yeah, where where it's a place which is not a melting pot, which is misdescribed. It's a salad bowl where people can be very different, but they still have a collective flavor. And that's what makes Bukhara a thing for me that you can never keep. You can have new dressings and new leaves and new fruits, but it remains still something composite. And so I've studied very interesting communities there, Bukhara Challa, Bukhara Jews, but also the other communities who have lived there. I mean Bukhara is it's an enigma in the sense it's been most mentioned and most well studied, yet most least understood. Well studied, but least understood parts of the whole region. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. I feel that your face expressions and your whole energy is becoming different when you are talking about Bukhara. So I know it's a very special for you. So you are observing and visiting Central Asia, all 5 countries, and plus Afghanistan, plus many other surrounding countries for already almost 30 years, very intensively.
Yeah.
I guess maybe maybe don't know how many times you already been there. Perhaps thousands or hundreds, I don't know. What could you say about trend in the development? If you look at the whole region, if you may have a bigger picture,
Right.
see 30 years development, what would be your big picture trend in this big picture?
Absolutely. No, it's a very deep question, and it'll require even if you talk for 7 hours, it will not do the service. But there's some points we can share. So I
Right.
would start kind of backwards in a sense from now. That something that changed, and a lot of people can have many different opinions about it, and they do, which is nice. That the changes that happened in Uzbekistan in 2017. After which Central Asia became connected to itself. And I would argue that this is the first time in history we can say we have Central Asia. We never had Central Asia before. We had Soviet Union, we had the Khanates, we had the Timurid and Mongol empires, and I'll restate my analogy from earlier, that salad bowl analogy, that you have distinct things which have a collective meaning, which I understand. So if you go back to where the moment I started to be in the region, the moment region was becoming available to study, to go visit there, the new sovereignty has appeared. So we had, of course, old histories and old ethnicities and old religious groups and old empires, but the sovereignty was the new thing. And how to build that sovereignty was each country's own special project, and it almost forced them to be separate from each other, to divide things to be their own and not have a meaning, a bit ahistorical, let's say, right? And that had its quite negative consequences, including a civil war in Tajikistan, continued unnecessary competition between the countries, and that is in the light of a slightly different aspect, which is important for my current analysis, is that the region has always been prosperous when it was connected. You can go back to whatever time. When it's connected, it's prosperous. When it's not, it declines. And there's a trend that I don't have to make up. Anyone can observe very, very simply. And we're seeing that connectivity return in a rational way. And the choices are being made not based on ideological frameworks but on very practical reality of geography and geology of the region. And not every, of course, there's a lot of work to do, and there are things which could be much better. I mean, that's why we are there, working, trying to find answers and so on. But the foundations have shifted towards a trend where we can think more positively. And I would conclude that by saying, for instance, Central Asia is affected by big things like climate change and energy crisis and so on. But individually, Central Asian countries cannot tell, for instance, Indians to drive less car, or Americans to eat less meat, or Chinese to do something else, have less factories. But collectively, they have a better place now to both offer solutions internally and globally. And I think that is the trend. We have to see the results of it. I'll be cautious. But I think,
Can we say that now we could consider Central Asia as a kind of political entity? Central Asia, not just separate countries, but whole Central Asia.
Exactly. I would definitely say that's a trend. I will be cautious to say that's a trend. And we have spoken before, you know my view. I would like to see institutions which represent this
Me too.
Before I can say yes it is. But but I certainly see something I can touch right now. So
more tangible.
More tangible.
Right. So how about the relationship between Central Asia and other outer world?
Right.
What trend do you see now?
I would say a recent analysis that I've been discussing with students, and this is obviously subjective in how I think about it, but one very nice, academically nice, but not necessarily nice for people involved. If you look at how Central Asia, the current Central Asia we discussed just now, is been dealing with the situation in Afghanistan, and it gives me a very tangible way to argue the case, is that we have seen this collective group of presidents and leaders appearing without any dichotomy or any controversy. One day in Washington and another day in Beijing and a third day in Delhi, or whatever it is. They have and individually and collectively they are moving and they're doing their things. But there's a clear consultative mechanisms coming into place about their own interest, and that's why Afghanistan one is the one that very clearly shows us. So if we look at Afghanistan in the previous era of Taliban, how countries dealt with it and how they looked at each other about how they dealt with it, as opposed to how each country has a very different local internal need of how they deal with Afghanistan. And yet they don't criticize the other one for doing it. There is a very clear coherence in saying, okay, you need to do this, I need to do this, but we are doing this together. So it's a not a simple pragmatic approach in us. It's a more sophisticated consultative approach. And this applies not only to Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the one we can measure directly, but we can see how the reality of talking to the world they cannot move from, i.e. world of Russia and Ukraine and Belarus. They're part of this world, but at the same time they're part of the bigger world, whether it is as far away as Beijing or Washington DC. And the way smoothly they move across this landscape is very unique. I don't see any other group of countries who have internal understanding in this way and then they're acting globally. So this is a big change, very big change from the past, where they will go undercut each other in the past. That has changed. I mean, you have been part of that process. You've seen how certain ways things will work. But now we see, fortunately, I hope this is a trend that I can continue to see. But this is where we are now.
Yeah, very interesting. So let's talk a little bit about modernization. So, of course, it's a very challenging process, the whole modernization. And of course, there are some supporters and some people who don't really like modernization of their country, their culture, Central Asia as a whole. So how do you see this process? Do you see it's going on? And what kinds of challenges we are facing with?
So I would look at it through again a couple of examples and analogies to explain that. So first of all, I think it's quite important to lower the volume on dichotomy between tradition and modernity. This is a very unacademic space. This is a very media space which creates more sensational stories, as opposed to reality, ground reality being that there's a whole range of things which are happening, and some things are happening organically, some things are being managed in a particular way, and the way we look at it from an academic perspective is that, so tradition by the definition is modern, because what is not being practiced,
paradoxical.
exactly, what's not being practiced is lost in history. It's history, it's not done anymore. So what is alive is modern, because it could survive, it found a way to find its way. And I think Central Asians have to remember that this is what they have done. and there are several indicators of this, right? So let's take our smaller neighbors from Uzbekistan. Let's look at our Kyrgyz, small country, very few people. As Indian, we can laugh like it's not even an Indian city, but but the fact that you can find them throughout the history, they still exist. There they are. This tells you there is something in Central Asian DNA that you can, if you look at many other people, there are even different people with the same name. Here we have more or less the same people from going far back. As we know, Kyrgyz and Uyghur are the two oldest Central Asian Turkic groups we know, and they have existed throughout till now, despite all the challenges that there are. And equally, as who we call Uzbeks, that the plurality within the system is quite amazing, right? So I would say that these are the features which we need to focus more on, and I think majority of people do focus on these features. But there are certain people who have a very strange perspective, both on tradition and modernity. Some people who believe the past can be deleted, whether is it Islamic or Soviet past. Some would like to think of the place as if there was a time where they can return to. So you ask a very active modernizer, like, where do you? It's very interesting. By modernizing, they want to claim what is their own, rather than progress and delete the past, right? Which is where the fun academic analysis, but very dark social part arises. So let me give an example rather than being abstract. That we know naturally two things, and I'll use language as an example. First of all, you can walk to Chorsu Bazaar or Barakhalkha or Dordoi and any of these big marketplaces, and you can speak to a young girl or boy or an 8-year-old woman in 6 different languages, and they have never had the chance to go to school or be educated in these languages. They have never been to any of these things. And so, as the Western and global North's view of language as something is very elite, as very educated, is not applicable to our world. People use language is not something stuck in nationality or ethnicity. Language is a practical means through which to achieve certain goals and certain aims. And we have always been a multilingual people. This belt from this lower step down to Malaysia, we are the most multilingual people the world has ever seen. Nobody's like us. Even our neighbors are not like that. And this is where India or Pakistan or Afghanistan or Central Asia, and neighboring parts, that's where a common history is, that we are multilingual people. I'm going to be a little bit controversial, but to say, if let's take Uzbeks or let's take Indians, that the Russian colonial endeavor or British colonial endeavor, we can speak to them in their language. Here I'm sitting and there you're sitting. We can both teach in English to the Americans and the British, but they don't know a word of our language. They were there for 400 years. So whether they're Americans or Russians, the same story applies. I know this is a slightly controversial thing to say, but the fact that our ability, our resilience to continue and without losing who we are, it doesn't change. I don't become Uzbek or American. You don't become Uzbek. You are. That is a strength. There are several things within Central Asian culture collectively, and multilingualism is one of them. It cannot be tied to a nationality, a flag, and a boundary.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but there are also some other sides of this knowing several languages. There are some studies which show that people who know several languages bring some new skills to your thinking. So you could think differently when you're facing some obstacles.
Yeah.
So you could go think out of box with your different language skills.
Yes.
I don't know, is it correct or not, but there are some ideas.
Well, there are different. Obviously, we can spend a lot of time on that, and we won't. But I'll give one example, which is important, easy to grasp, is that I'm sitting here in Cambridge, and there's famous Cambridge scientist Isaac Newton, who doesn't know him, and then he had a academic, intellectual competitor, a sparring partner on the continent called Leibniz, and they are both credited for developing the maths, what we call calculus today, differential mathematics. And one can say to an extent that since they thought about the same abstract idea in different languages, the way they codified the thing allows us to do different things today. So Newton's one allows us to have an analytical approach towards quickly looking at a problem, while systematic Leibniz approach allows us to program computers. Eventually, algorithmic approach. Of course, algorithmic, we go back to Bukhara again, but we won't go there now. But this so by diluting away the skill space on a language is something very important for the global world, that more languages, more ideas, more, as you said, ways of solving the same problem in different places. And if we lose that, we lose a lot what we will do in the future.
So let's talk a little bit about Central Asian studies. So how do you assess the state of Central Asian studies, not in Central Asia, but outside of Central Asia, in different parts of the world? UK, mainland Europe, America, India, etc.
So I would say that we need to categorize, in a sense, what we mean by Central Asian studies. And no categories of is perfect, but it's tries to catch most of the meaning. So if you go to, let's say, I'll pick a point in time. So if you go to late Soviet period, and look at the famous book, which many of academics know, a volume of books commissioned by UNESCO on Central Asian studies, a multi-volume book, and many of our colleagues we know contributed to that. Yeah, and that had a particular meaning of Central Asian studies. This is before Central Asian countries became sovereign states as we know them, and they focused on this landscape in which things happened, and in a sense, the World Silk Road came out of that. So that was a great effort in one way, but to me, it also had a slightly negative outcome. That while those were, and I don't mean to dismiss the work at all in any way, the work is excellent. I'm talking about how those who are not specialists use that work, and we will talk a little bit about this thing. So there are certain easy outcomes which the words like Silk Road and common trends around Silk Road emerged from that. The words which people don't know what were the actual scholars saying about it, as opposed to just looking at a map and understanding it. It led to a understanding that Central Asia historically was an empty space, and there was ideas and goods emerged in Far East. We can call it today China, and it had a market in the West, so called the Europe or whatever you want to say, and Central Asia was a thoroughfare. But if you really read the volume, you'll see exactly the opposite. Central Asia is a fountain from which things are emerging, ideas, materials, political entities, which are connecting the global world. And this understanding is something which was, in a sense, existed in the past when people did Central Asian studies. They stood or studied Central Asia for itself. But the modern word Central Asian studies means something else. It's an instrumentalized political, socio-economic political construct, which is studied for a purpose, not for its own intrinsic value.
Very interesting. So politics played a role.
Yes, and continues to play a role. That now we have a new word which people use without understanding it at all. As a physicist, I'm often quite disgusted by it. Critical raw material, CRM. This is now the word that everybody uses in political systems. They have no idea what that means. They don't know critical for what and critical for who. But it's taking the global same idea repeats itself. There's an existing global supply chain to which centralization should supply to, and if they don't, just like the oil, just like the silk, just like the whatever else. So this is a contestation which is not taking place, and that's largely, I mean, I know you are, I am, where few of us contest that, but there is not a field of scholars who are established. I mean, there are of course exceptions. There are a few excellent people, and I don't mean to say that most people are somehow malicious in doing whatever they're doing. It's just that it's the current structure of publishing, promotions, getting funding, require manages them to do things in a certain way. And I would say very much, Alisher, here between you and me, we had a luxury to engage with it in our own terms. I as a physicist, didn't need centralization for my career, for my salaries, and neither did you for your particular background from what you came from. You did it because you were interested, but it's not available to our many colleagues to do it in that way.
We are not, our life doesn't depend on
doing it or not doing it.
For Central Asian studies.
That's right. Yes. So I think we need. I'll just add last thing to that analysis, which I've left out, was that another thing that happened at the end of the Cold War was that a lot of framing, which you know better than me, the Cold War framing of Central Asian studies through Soviet and anti-Soviet sentiments, which got compounded with anti-Iranian sentiment, which was further tagged on by the anti-Chinese sentiment. Also, we see that conceptual and the ontological frameworks which develop out of that also decided, so that's another area.
Very interesting. But can you say a few words about the differences in Central Asian studies in different parts of the world? Europe, America, and some other parts.
There are certain
differences.
There are certain how to put it. It's you need a picture to describe it. The certain groups across, say, for what would call political studies, generally act similarly across all the most spaces. And I would even argue the sociology studies works in a similar way. Let me say why. Because there are two answers. First, the two aspects. First is that who are consuming this research. The political science is very deeply connected to policy, and policy decides. So in a sense, does policy comes from studying the research, or the research is there to confirm a certain policy? and you know,
chicken and egg.
Enact, yes. And that's we see more of happening because, again, what we said earlier, funding, promotions, publications, and so on demand that's that one space of doing it. And the second aspect of it is that the field related studies, given what we just discussed, how Central Asia was unavailable, and Central Asia as an entity was unavailable, so certain topics and countries and regions got privileged in studying them because people could not access those regions, so they would not. So there's a whole generation of people in, for instance, Britain there's a whole generation of scholars who studied Kyrgyzstan deeply because that's where they could go, and one led to another. One has a network who helps another one, and so on, more so than others. Americans had a very different relationship with Uzbekistan, and they developed more Uzbek-related scholarship in the U.S. Right? You have diversification in this way, right? So with Germany, there was a bit more diverse, but their connection with ethnic Germans in Kazakhstan and various other things again allowed a certain way of thinking developing. Italy, with its oil industry coming early into the region, has its own need. So yeah, I would say there are communities and differences. Yeah,
it's in a way illustrates agency structure.
Exactly. That's the best summary. It's agency structure which decides.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. How about the Central Asian studies within Central Asia? How do you see it? How do you assess it?
It's something that I'm literally dealing with on a daily basis. And we go from, and I would like venture to say that there is almost a binary situation there. There is a scholarship of reactionary nationalism which believes that know everything and everything belongs to that one particular place. So it's not, Central Asian to them means that everything is Uzbek or everything is Kazakh or everything is Kyrgyz or everything is Uyghur or whatever else and so on, and all others are subsidiary to that. And there is that thing that's emerged, and that's because of not having access to literature, not having access to scholarly communities, is trying to appeal to certain political or social constructs within where the people are. And then you have the opposite side, which believes that they don't have a school of thought. There's no Central Asian studies here. We need to go and learn from outside how to do Central Asian studies. What I'm seeing is these two groups. Of course, again, there are exceptions always, but as systematic thing, this is what we're seeing happening in the region. I would just conclude that by saying that is a product of what we discussed before. The Central Asia was not connected with each other. So we have had a generation of people, not like yours, but anybody even 10 years younger than you, who grew up not knowing anybody else in Central Asia.
Do you see any differences between countries in this respect? So Central Asian studies in different countries of Central Asia. What are similarities and what are differences?
I would point to a particular, again, giving an analogy, some names of people, if I may. If I take two names, Professor Abu Saitova in Almaty in Kazakhstan, Academy of Science Institute of History, and take Professor Munira Shahidi in Tajikistan. People a similar academic age group as yourself, but been in that profession all their lives. And they are historians and cultural studies type people. And you can see in their approach is constantly try to keep all Central Asian people together, academics together, and study together and understand both the nuances and differences. So in historical cultural studies, you have this continuation of this coherence and so on. And they publish globally, they go out and so on. That's great. But I have a complaint to them. I don't see them replicated by them. I don't see their second, third, fourth generation people who would have come up in the same way. And that I see as a problem. So I see there's still hope. I would say they have trained my students better than perhaps students within the country. And maybe it's not their fault. Maybe students are not willing for the reasons that they don't think that this is relevant. This is going to get them a job. That's one way, one part of the answer. The second part of the answer is that the differences you asked within the region. We cannot pretend and we should not pretend that academic work can happen without support for it, without financial and how to say infrastructural, institutional support for it. And the variation is very much representative of that. And that support is not only product of local government, they're international partners as well. So again, we see I don't want to criticize that, but it's not but over excessive attention on Kyrgyzstan, because it could happen. The institutions were there, international institutions were there, local institutions were there. We see a little bit of change across now, how things are happening. But what we have seen very much is in the younger people, kind of younger scholars from the region, whether they are, especially when they're abroad, to think of their countries as lower places. They don't imagine, like you, to return back to their countries. They think that. So this reminds me of my generation in India in some sense, who got left. It was not a choice they had. They believed that they have to be out to be scholars and they must perform to those things. But these linkages are important in shaping, and they're shaped by each country's own
Very interesting.
reality. Mm.
You know, when you look at scholars in the fields such as political science or international relations in Central Asia, and of course, I could say more about Uzbekistan, you may notice that most of them somehow study Central Asia. So Central Asia is the most central subject for them. Not studying some other countries like UK, US. There are some few exceptions, but most are involved in Central Asian studies. Somehow, relationship between Uzbekistan and China or something like that. Even when the young people want to do some research, PhD in political science or international relations, very often they're required somehow to connect their studies to the region or to their countries.
Yeah, yeah.
So what do you think? Is it a right approach or it should be a little different? So more people should study not just Central Asia, within Central Asia, but also some other regions, like, I don't know, Burundi, or Cameroon, or Mexico, etc.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So and I mean, you know that I agree with you on this point very much so, and I've always been, in a sense, disappointed that I've never had forget Burundi, I've never had a physics PhD student from the region. You know, I've had so many people doing scintillation studies, doing scintillation, but never had one I could get into physics, which I've been doing for so long, given all the interaction I've had. So it's not limited even to just that. It's limited, you know, outside of that. Scintillation, to go out to do scintillation studies, are almost nothing else. Very few. I mean, there are, again, you can find 5 who didn't.
Of course, this is very important, Central Asian studies.
Exactly.
We have to know more about
Completely.
our region, but at the same time, why not to
Yeah.
look at some other places as well?
So I would answer this question from outside of Central Asia, as somebody who works outside of Central Asia. There are two things, and first thing will sound like conspiracy theory, but it's, since data is so big, as you pointed out, it's a fact that to go outside, you must you have two factors, which are very interestingly coming from different places, but lead to the same result. So if it's the funding in place to get people, is the British or the Germans or the Japanese who want to know about Central Asia, so they will fund study on Central Asia rather than about Burundi, right? If and they won't fund an Uzbek to come and study Shakespeare easily. There are exceptions, again, as we know, but that's the thing. Similarly, when the funding comes from inside the country, they also want to go and enhance the country's knowledge about the country, so they send them out to study a problem back home. So both lead to this concentration of a very how to say, uniform sort of group of people doing similar things outside, rather than myriad things in a different way, and so on. So I think that's the number one problem, in my view. Number two is a minor one, because it's very few people. There are some people, as we know, Shirzad Muminov. Then we have somebody like Timur Dadabayev. Although he's known for his work on scintillation studies, he has done a large amount of work on Japanese studies, which nobody's interested in Central Asia. And he writes in Japanese, and he does Japanese work in Japanese society, but that's not in the discussion. And similarly, there are other people who are out there doing other things, but they're not in the radar because they have now moved on to do other things. They're in different academic or social cultural spaces doing whatever they do, kind of thing, right? So there is a, okay, not popular these days, but you can do an analogy that why there are more Russian experts who study different parts of the world, both inside and outside the country, than they do in Central Asia. And it's about access, it's about language, it's about where will this lead to an opportunity.
And also funding, perhaps.
Well, that's what I meant. Opportunity is funding, is in a sort of way. But if you were to see, I mean, this is again a narrow, not a big thing, but there's one cohort which is now coming becoming mature enough and being produced is we had one very good example, unfortunately, sadly, recently passed away. Mahmudova, you know her from the EBRD. And so she, Kamola, indeed, Kamola Mahmudova, she was an expert in many different areas of the world because she worked in EBRD in studying these countries. And there are many other Uzbeks and Kazakhs and Kyrgyz who are in these international organizations, getting experience in very different parts of the world. I had a big surprise a few months ago rather. I have a colleague, I have a collaboration in Costa Rica in physics.
Mm-hmm.
And we were doing some work, and for a project we needed to produce a picture. So he got somebody to produce a picture, and picture came back with a credit with a Kazakh female name.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, where did you get this? So then I found out that in Costa Rica there is a Kazakh girl studying photography and culture.
Mm-hmm.
But she would probably end up there in other parts of the world. She would not be known to you and me, and unless by this coincidence. So the small hope is that I don't think that it's not happening, but lack of resources into studying other places, and the consumption of that research is not yet there, and that to me is the main thing I can say. And I can add to that what happened to Indians as an Indian scholar studying abroad, that away from technical sciences, of course, that's a different thing, is that how it changed from them, being the people who were studied to people who studied anything. So, who then write a book about Africa or South America or comparative cultures and so on. And that I think time for it is yet to arrive. I think if you were in 1960s and 70s looking at South Asian scholars or Singaporeans or whatever, we were in the same place, I think, where Central Asians are now.
Okay. I think even in terms of knowing better Central Asia, when some scholars study some other regions or some other problems, they could be very beneficial.
Absolutely.
Because you could compare. It gives some comparative perspective, not just within something, but going out of box thinking.
Yeah, the same thing we said about the language, multiple languages. It's the same conceptual thing. We, as the countries mature and they become more global, they have to have that aspect. Otherwise, they will stagnate.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about Central Asian universities.
Mm-hmm.
I know you are very big expert in this field. You know every university, you have very good relationship. You are in the board of trustees and some other big position in several universities in Central Asia. So how do you see the development of Central Asian universities and their weaknesses and their strengths?
As you said, it's a question that I'm deeply invested in personally, and whether it's a worthwhile venture, only time will tell. But I think two very important things to consider to analyze this framework is that the Central Asian countries and its neighboring regions are going through a transition, which is not just economic or political or social, but it's an institutional transition that's taking place. And the institutional transition requires certain tools to be able to implement them, and that to be done under a big pressure from international organizations and big players on one side, and through cultural penetration from the populations of the countries themselves. The expectations are grown to do something, but what to do is still, I think, at early stages, despite what many ministries and rectors will disagree with me. But just looking at it from outside and being part of the process as well, in a way. So we had we can argue whether it was good or bad with all its shortcomings, but Soviet education system was not something novel. It was a continuation of a European continental system.
German first.
German, first of all, German. And we have to remember nearly at the same time, the German system was informing the American system as well. It was the most prominent system. It was informing globally. They each went slightly different way. And but the idea of having a knowledge production slightly decoupled from the pedagogic exercise, meaning Academy of Sciences type of thinking, versus a research university, were organized in a logic, both in terms of resources, the needs of country, the regional variations, and so on. How it was broken apart all of a sudden, with literally a nuclear bomb, to destroy these linkages, is where we cause the problem in the region. Go from being above many. Let me just say another thing. One of the important framing is that when we look at Central Asian countries, we cannot think of them same as any other developing countries, because they were at high level of development not very long ago in terms of standard things of healthcare, social education, and so on. And while even China, for whether it's India or China, but Korea for that matter, and many African countries, there the model is of growing something from the ground, developing where something didn't exist. Here it's a different mechanism. It's arresting a fall, and rather than just so. But the international system, development system, doesn't know that. It has only tools for developing something that doesn't exist. So it ignores what exists. It sidelines. And Alisher Faizullaev instantly, because it doesn't understand the places where you come from, and many of your generation colleague, right? By your personal endeavor, you can overcome it, but there is no institutional framework to keep it alive, right? And that is where the problem lies. Number one. Second is the practical one. So you copy and paste a Western, what is believed to be Anglo-Saxon system, which is supposed to be, which again, forgetting, like, this, and I think you wrote a little bit about this as well. What is British education? I mean, I am now a vice rector of British Management University in Tashkent, as you know, and it's where we are attempting to put in place a system which is sensitive to these things. It's still very early, very young university. But what is a British system? There's no British system. It doesn't exist, right? Cambridge and Oxford are different from all other universities, which are different. They're different from each other. Scotland and England is different from each other. So but you can't convince that to anybody in Uzbekistan, or for that matter in Iran, or for that matter in India. They just believe there's a British thing. Same thing with the American one, like the vast differences between state universities, the private institutes, liberal arts colleges. There's a huge different variety. So when you say I'm getting a Western, what are you getting? Which one are you getting? And are you getting the right pieces of it? So this is where the
that's right.
The mess lies. You don't know what you're buying, and yeah. Sorry. No, please go ahead.
You are giving a very interesting conceptual framework to look at this issue. But can you please say in a little more simplistic way, how do you see universities in Central Asia, best of them, are they good in competition with others, or they are not competitive yet?
So again, what I say is not going to be popular, but I'm speaking from analysis rather than opinion. If you look at just after Soviet Union's collapse and in countries becoming independent, and 15 years onwards, meaning that certain institutional frameworks hadn't changed drastically. And if you can see from that time, number of students, undergraduate or master's students produced in Central Asia, and I mean here in all subjects, not just humanities and arts, but across so science, were relatively easily able to gain access to, when they overcome the language barrier, when they got that everything else was in place for them to go and succeed anywhere in the world in competitive universities, whether it's Cambridge or Harvard or whatever else, doesn't matter. and this is the controversial part, that if you look at what happens after that, is we see that not happening, first of all, reducing drastically. Secondly, what we see is that they do, next jump happens when there's enough money in national programs to pay for them to go abroad. They go, but first to the second, third, fourth tier, but also to the less rigid program, less how to say, less selective programs in the top universities as well. And you see this trend continuing. Yeah, that's where we are. Yeah.
Well, how to get access to top programs in top universities? It is a difficult. It's not a easy things.
No.
But anyway, what should be done? So, in order to raise quality of education, especially we are talking about higher education.
First, number one thing is research integration with teaching. Number one, but number one comes with a caveat. The researchers should be given time to do research. There has to be those two things have to come with equal power. So if you're in Cambridge, you have 50% time off for research and 50% for teaching. That may be luxury for Cambridge. But all other American and British institutions have a very clear provision for your research times. So you are teaching students how to do, you're making them future proof. Your research has to be forward looking. So what you teach them, baseline teaching is fine. That's not going to get you to the future, and future needs research. As long as that things, but research has to be done of high enough quality, and there has to be both time and money provision for it. And if we were to create a few top good universities, we can concentrate on them for sure. Some others have a different role, and it's just same here in UK or US. Other ones have different function in the thing. But right now, what we're seeing is an opposite, that there is no research provision, but teachers are forced to produce or at least show research results without any time or money put into this. And so you kill both research and teaching as a result. And that's where the biggest mistake being made right now.
As you know, I am now in America at the university, and I see there are different opinions about where should we go to become more research type of university, more teaching type of university, even among professors. Some of them in many universities, I believe, think that we should be more selective, more research oriented. That would give us more prestige, better students, better funding, etc. But some think, well, we should support some students who are first in their family to get a higher education. So we should not go too far in our attempt to become a research universities. So our mission could be a little different. So do you, coming back to Central Asia, do you believe that we, in the end, will develop, and maybe it should develop, clearly two types of universities? One, research universities, like top universities in UK and US, and teaching universities. Or the other model, like Scandinavian model, all universities are more or less the same. All are involved in research. Maybe they're not very top, but they're also accessible, good in teaching, supporting first newcomers, but also doing some research, but they are more or less equal. Not there are top research and just teaching university. Which model would be better for Central Asia?
So first of all, it's interesting to note that how this debate was already settled 150 years ago by Germans, by dividing the role of the two into Academy of Sciences and so on, and it worked very well. In fact, those who argue can argue for whatever, but we got here today because of that production of both people and ideas from that world. That produced all the Nobel Prizes that we have, but what we had before. So now we are trying to break that without thinking what could be the future, and that's the question you're asking. And the question, the best way to answer that question is that there is no model out there for any particular country to just borrow from. That is not the thing. Each country has to do its own mix, and resources, projection of resources, projection of population, and your industrial needs, and your vision on development of citizenship are the key factors which allow you to create the mix that's relevant to you through consultation with people, the academia, and everybody else. And this I'm going to say, without any holding back any diplomatic, I think that number one problem in Central Asia, the number one, I would say, in any aspect, is there is still a belief somewhere in the mindset about being a defeated Soviet Union, and those who defeated know it better. And we must then borrow it from outside, and that's the answer. And only opposite of that is the completely crazy set, no, we know everything and we are the best. There's no creative, constructive, solution-making process of those things are true at their own level, but reality is a big mix of things. And that's not accepted yet at the ground level. That immediately you say X means that's the problem, and also disowning the problem. It was the Soviets who did this, so now they're gone. We will go to those who defeated them and get the right answer. And that's where the big problem lies. But the concrete answer to your question is that if you look at, if I had to sit here and all of a sudden with a gun on my head answer to all the 5 presidents what you should do, I have different answers for all of them. Right? Yeah. So it's a very different thing. Strangely, Kazakhstan, the largest Kazakhstan, is very similar to Tajikistan because regions are separate and not easily accessible from each other. Right? Uzbekistan is very accessible and a coherent theme around the country. So how do you do things? It can be done in a different way. So one has to reconceptualize how many and what we need for each country. And I think the Nordic model, again, what people say versus what it is different. Despite of what you describe, if you were to send your child on scholarship to Trondheim University, but you had a admission, and there's only 2 universities left in the world, and nothing else was an option, and to Stockholm, and you had to pay half the tuition fees, you will go and borrow money from all your relatives and send him to Stockholm rather than have to take the scholarship in Trondheim. This is what you will do. I mean conceptually.
Very interesting. All right. I have last 2 questions,
Sure.
if you don't mind. Maybe I'll combine them.
Sure.
This is, I would kindly ask you to give some advice with your very rich experience and knowledge and seeing, traveling, all those things. Number 1, what kinds of advice would you give to universities in Central Asia to develop the relationship with best foreign universities? We know that international cooperation is very important for development of scholarship, education, etc. So this is one thing. And second, what advice would you give to scholars in Central Asia to become world-class scholars?
Good. Thank you. So my first one, I'm going to start at a very direct level. I think if you want Central Asian universities to have viable long-term partnerships in research, in student development, in faculty development, number one thing that has to be done is that any rector, any minister which proposes to sign an MOU with the university should be immediately fired. There should not be there should not be signing of any MOUs at all. And if there's an MOU signed between
That's
any
mostly they do this.
they have to stop.
Number one thing they usually try to do.
That's the number one thing they cannot do. Why? Let me justify my words. It goes back to where we started. We're looking at institutional frameworks which are different. So if you come to UK, come to US, to many European or other countries, if a rector signs an agreement with a rector of another university in the world, in outside of a post-Soviet space, and let's say generally Asian space, a rector has no power to functionalize any relationship. Has zero power. They cannot tell a student to go to Uzbekistan. They cannot tell a teacher to teach Uzbek. They have nothing. So
it's up to teachers.
Up to the teachers, up to the students. So that leads to answering your second question, is that both the scholars and the institutions, in a sense, the institutions and the ministries need to support scholars to make links with their colleagues abroad and find funding for that. And that has two things. First of all, people who are not in an official position don't move. They remain that way. I am here for you for 25 years not because I'm head of St. Alisher Forum or anything else or any other department, because we have something to talk about. Here we are talking, right? And if you don't build a relationship, that's just limited to some leadership and changes. It doesn't matter where you are. So it's functional problem, I'm not trying to criticize somebody for that. Secondly, rewarding something that you cannot measure, that a rector can or a head of department in St. Alisher can sign many MOUs and then they're rewarded for it. But how do you measure the success? That is not a result, right? So the result is that students are working together, people's skills are enhanced. How do we measure? How do we measure your and my prestige? Because we invited, okay, we can publish even. That's one thing. That's a smaller thing. The fact that based on those publications, people recognize and invite us to speak about that work. That's visible impact. It's objective. It's out there. You can see what kinds of people are inviting us. You can see what kind of places we're speaking in. Anybody can see that, right? Maybe they can't read a journal paper and so on, right? These are the metrics which have been lost, and sadly, we're losing them in the West as well. Fast, you're seeing in America. That's why the debate that you mentioned that happened, right? So that's the key thing. It sounds quite crazy to a scintillation vector, but it's not.
Yeah, but here it might be a little one additional element when they try to sign different kinds of agreement. It's structural development. Again, we discussed agency structure problem. So agency, it's a teachers. So a lot of things depend on scholars, teachers themselves to act as an agency.
Yeah.
But when they have some kinds of structure, which could be somehow created through this kinds of agreement, they could act maybe a little bit better.
I would agree if MU had an MOU was had any substance in it. So and it was resourced. So structural development, you cannot have a structure without actually structural coherence. So you saying that you will cooperate on everything rather than saying I will now cooperate on economic sciences and 5 students will go and this side will fund that and those sides will receive them. That is an agreement. Sign an agreement. Don't sign something that has no intrinsic value in it. You can, that's all I'm saying. Sign an agreement. Yeah, I'm not against agreements. They're important, like you said, for structural development. They're necessary. Yeah.
All right. So second question, for individual scholars, what would be your advice for them to become world-class scholars?
So here we have a new opportunity, which didn't kind of exist before. And again, I'm going against a little bit of the popular words. First thing is that, as we know, as academics, and almost 90% of people we know, there is 10% who are different, are successful because they're passionate about what they do. And they write and they do what is necessary in their profession to do whatever the way that is. And it's in I always have to go back to Bukhara. So the Bahauddin Naqshband's main words were that he was a Naqshband, embroiderer. To Naqsh in Farsi and Arabic means a pattern, and Band to seal it. And he said that the best prayer you can do is to create a beautiful pattern, which is unique work. And perfection of your work, seeking passion and perfection, the two P's, is the one that is going to make you where you are. Yeah. And the controversial part is that everybody is arguing about AI, and whether it's going to destroy us. Another discussion to have. I don't believe in that, but the fact is that it's an amazing opportunity, because translation scholars were cut off because of language from the global communities. And in fact, we can turn this around. You can write in Uzbek, write in Russian, write in Turkmen or Kyrgyz, write in Karakalpak. Now, language models can allow you to actually translate that to a professional level. In fact, you will do a justice to the world by introducing these languages into the language models to be able to be translated. And then you can get
any risk to plagiarize when you are using all these things?
Exactly. So think it's both, it works the two sides of a coin. Something that becomes, this is in a sense a very big debate between hard sciences and engineering and social sciences. So in hard sciences, we declare the results immediately, and so they're publicly owned by us. Anybody who copies them, they can suppress us in some way, but they can't really copy it. If I hide it, and then if somebody can take it. So language models, because of their public nature, if you plagiarize, you're also seen immediately. It works both ways. People can copy you much more easily, but they will be caught much more easily as well, unlike before. Right? So if the work is written in Karakalpak and translated into English through our language model, that has its own uniqueness. But if the Karakalpak has copied that work from a Chinese and published it in English, today he will be caught. 5 years ago, he couldn't have been. Okay. It's a new opportunity. It's a new area, but to be discussed. I'm sure I don't know everything, and I may have missed something in this thing, but I see an opportunity here.
Well, I fully agree with you about the passion, of love, and doing what you really want to do. That's perhaps the key factor to be successful in any area.
Anything.
Yeah, including scholarship.
Yeah.
But of course, it is somehow not just depend on individuals, because of the whole environment, society, how they support people. That's why, unfortunately, some years ago, we've seen decline of interest to science, to scholarship in Central Asian countries. But now there are some positive trends. More and more young people want to become not just a businessman. It's still number one, perhaps, things young people want to be. But nevertheless, there is some rise among these young people who want to be also scholars, teachers. That's a good trend. I don't know. Well, how's your observation about that?
My observation is not that different from yours. And I think we did discuss from the beginning that the ecosystem, the support system is necessary for individuals. And we discussed how many ways it can be either formed or not formed. However, the fact that we've reached a point where the diversity of ways in which people can be successful is finally being recognized. The meaning of success being only financial one has now, in a sense, and that I can kind of understand coming from the moment. Just imagine the Central Asian societies at the moment of Soviet collapse. You didn't even have a currency. Forget having money. You didn't even have a currency of your own that you could work with, institutional frameworks, right? So that became the focus of thinking about how, and then the certain, how to say, misassigned historical Uzbeks are traders and Kazakhs are farmers, and all these different stereotypes which emerged from that era are also kind of we moved on from there kind of a thinking, and we realized that different people, different groups within each society have different set of things, and each that within that group success means what it means, and it's recognized that is a very new trend. I would say it's a positive trend, and in fact, it in a sense, it enhances the economic condition, or at least gives resilience, rather than ups and downs, which would follow if you have followed only one kind of a trend. And I can again speak from this this position of being in these boards and positions within Central Asian universities, that the simple trend I've seen of number of people who are wanting to come and teach from different professions. They think again that being part of a university teaching, even as adjunct, is something prestigious. That's a very good sign. It shows a societal recognition of this diversity. Yeah.
Well, Montu, thank you so much. As always, conversation with you, it's very much insightful, enlightening, and also thank you so much for things what you are doing for Uzbekistan, for other Central Asian countries, supporting cultural exchanges, scientific exchanges, supporting young scholars, universities. That's very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alisher. It's been a pleasure, and you probe very well. It's not that I know anything. You get the best out of people. Thank you for that.
Thank you.